So we tend now to speak about the different political traditions underpinning policy practice in Australia. And we are very much relying really on Dalton's classification of these policy traditions. So Dalton ultimately categorized or distinguished four core traditions. Firstly, the libertarian, the social liberal, the egalitarian, and then the communitarian political traditions. And then later, McClelland, whom you have in your textbook, added a fifth category, which is known as the conservative political tradition. So the libertarian political tradition really just assumes that individual self-interest and individual negative freedoms are paramount. So what is meant by negative freedom here is just something which refers to the first generation rights, the civil and the political rights or forms of freedoms. So technically, this suggests that this just calls for states' non-interference in individual freedoms. That the idea of negative freedom itself really just suggests that people enjoy their freedom with no interference at all of the government or any external coercion or external interference in their freedom. And this, of course, I very much insist on this because I know it can be a little bit problematic because, in contexts where we have this belief that people should enjoy their rights in a sort of freedom where nobody interferes, the government doesn't interfere, that in itself, I really want to invite you to be critical about that because that in itself can be problematic in some ways. Instances in which, for example, that might lead to people over enjoying the rights, if I can say it that way, and then that in itself leading to the fact that they have to enjoy their rights doesn't end up not respecting other people's rights. Although, of course, that's not the primary goal of the libertarian tradition. So the libertarian tradition also places high value on the market and is hostile to government action or government interventionism. So the example of this in the UK is, the government led by Thatcher, and in the US, the government of former President Reagan, and in Australia, mostly the example of this could be the Liberal Democrats and some other liberal people believing in the liberal freedoms in Australia. So the second one is the social liberal tradition. To some extent, almost similar to the libertarian, but the core idea for the social liberal is that they believe they draw very much on utilitarian ideas, greatest good for the greatest numbers. So the idea here really is very much freedom and fairness must go together. People need support to make real choices rather than just intervening or not intervening at all. Kind of really balances both options. It's very much interested in pursuit of social goals and intervention in the market towards that end, and as well as self-interest. So it very much values individual freedom highly, but in the context that people require the positive freedoms of being able to realize their aspirations, not just getting freedom, but having it to achieve certain goals. It's very influential in the Australian social policy context, and you can see that, shall have to consider that more and more as we look at different policy sectors in Australia. So some political parties which can be identified with this are the Liberals again, but also to some extent, some members of the Labour Party in Australia. So again, this also speaks to the second generation rights, which are the social, economic, and cultural rights. People need opportunities. People need access to education, health, housing, employment. But again, social liberal tradition suggests that all these should be regulated, not just given for granted. So this means that it really recognizes the extent to which government can do things under certain conditions, and while considering also the impact that chance is in life can end up having on people as government is trying to achieve the goals of policy making. Then you have the egalitarian tradition, which reflects just to some extent, again, similar to, the social democratic values. But the idea for the egalitarian tradition is that, not just the rights again, but outcomes, to achieve social justice is like the biggest outcome of this tradition as well. So the egalitarian party places all people are equal and therefore have equal rights. And this goes beyond civic rights or even political rights, but even encompasses social rights. So to some extent, this tradition very much insists on the redistribution, which needs to be justified in pursuit of equality, not just for the sake of doing it, and believes that, redistribution needs to benefit society via the provision of equal opportunities for citizens. So to some extent, again, in the Australian, arena, you might consider the Greens, and to some extent, of course, the Labour Party as, representing this point of view or this political tradition. So they view that economic and social interventions are required to promote social justice, again, is a big consideration under the egalitarian tradition. And then we have the communitarian tradition, which very much highly values social relationships. And under communitarian, you have this word community, which is like a very big focus of the communitarian tradition. So what they really advocate for is just some restriction. They want some restrictions and very much value that the government to some point needs to intervene even to regulate and restrict some of the individual freedoms or even benefits people can get from the government. So what the communitarian tradition is advocating for is that, to some extent, if, for example, some cash benefits people are getting from the government, if that cash benefit can't be used, in a right way, then the government should even restrict it to those people who are getting it and who can't use it in the best possible way. And of course, some examples of these include some indigenous policies that emphasize cultural identity and community leadership rather than just, rigid governmental interventions. So as we said, these are the four core traditions outlined by Dalton, but McClelland, the main textbook for this course, added a fifth tradition, which is the conservative tradition. So this is quite similar to social liberal tradition, but distinguished by a strong respect for the continuation of social institutions. They've placed a very strong emphasis on the family, community, religion, and Christianity in particular in the Australian context, and of course, private property. So they prefer order maintaining and authority of the government. They really believe very much in the status quo, celebrate traditional Christian values, believe very much in the family. And you can see why some notable conservative Australians have been have had this reputation, for example, of being against the equality of marriage and same-sex marriage. So again, all these are reflected in the conservative political tradition. So clear examples of these are the former Prime Minister John Howard and Tony Abbott. John Howard, particularly, who refused to apologize for the stolen generations, arguing that he didn't perceive the current generation as being responsible for doing that, and thinking even the apology itself would be just, would make no difference. And again, John Howard has this reputation of having publicly taken positions against contemporary developments, like against same-sex marriage, for example, as I started saying. So then the question is, why should you really need to know about all these different traditions? I think they are very important as we, keep developing this course. It is very important for you to understand, why specific political actors and political parties in particular tend to adopt specific positions. Again, all these positions, policy positions, are not just coming at random. They are very deep rooted in their belief systems and their different traditions. So this is very important for you to understand at this point, because then it helps you, it gives you really the good foundation for focusing on different policy areas. And when we start looking at which political party has taken which position regarding specific policy debates, then you know where these are coming from. So that's all from me today. Thank you very much for your attention. I really hope that you really get the time to listen to all these lectures, and see you next week in the tutorials.